All right, today we're jumping right into a huge European scandal. We're talking hundreds of millions of euros in fraud, high-level political drama, and this really tense fight for justice between European prosecutors and a national government. And it all kicks off with a pretty shocking admission from the country's leader himself.
So yeah, this is the Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis. The state's inadequacy is obvious. You just don't hear a country's leader say something like that every day. It's a blunt admission of failure, and it really sets the stage for a story about a system that seems to be broken from the inside. So how did a problem that's been simmering for years suddenly just blow up into a massive national crisis? Well, let's look at the exact moment the dam broke.
Okay, so boom. June 2025 hits, and everything implodes. The European Public Prosecutor's Office, they're known as EPPO, drops this absolute bombshell of a report. We're talking nearly 3,000 pages detailing just massive fraud. The fallout was fast and furious. 5 senior officials were out, including a cabinet minister. The prime minister himself ordered the state agency at the center of it all to be dissolved. And of course, a special task force was promised.
So what exactly was in that report? What did the prosecutors actually find? Well, it all centered on a scheme that netted nearly 300 million euros. A scheme they called the fake farmer scam. Yeah, let that number sink in for a second. 290 million euros. This wasn't just some accounting error or a little bit of money going missing. This was a vast sum of EU taxpayer money, cash that was supposed to go to real, working farmers, just systematically siphoned off.
So who was pulling this off? They got a great name for it, right? Fake farmers. Basically, these are people who had little or no connection to farming at all. They would just falsely claim to own or lease land so they could get their hands on those sweet, sweet EU subsidies.
And how'd they do it? Honestly, the methods were just brazen. We're talking about claims for pastures that literally didn't exist, fictitious plots of land. And get this, one of the most absurd examples was a claim for thousands of hectares of olive groves at an altitude so high it's pretty much impossible for olive trains to even survive, let alone produce anything. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a systematic operation that ran for years.
You know, this one quote from a wiretap, it just says it all. An official was caught on tape describing some of this land as so remote that, quote, not only grazing is impossible, but cockroaches can't even survive. That tells you everything. People on the inside knew exactly how ridiculous this all was.
Okay, so this clearly wasn't just a handful of clever scammers. For a fraud this huge to go on for this long, you need more than that. You need a broken system. A corrupt system. And at the center of this whole mess is this one agency. OPEC. Think of them as the gatekeepers for a ton of money. We're talking 3 billion euros in EU farm aid every single year. Their whole job was to make sure that money went to the right people. Instead, it looks like they became the engine of the fraud. And listen, the European prosecutors, they did not hold back. They didn't just call the agency mismanaged or incompetent. In their official report, they called OPKP a criminal organization that systematically organized the whole embezzlement scheme. I mean, that's an absolutely stunning assessment to see in an official document. So you might be asking, how did this even start? How did the door get kicked wide open for all this fraud? Well, you have to go back to a bureaucratic decision in 2015. First, the EU created a new rule about pasture land size. The thing is, Greece's landscape didn't really fit that rule, so the government came up with a, quote, technical solution. And bam, that solution created a massive loophole that basically let anyone claim land anywhere. And that loophole became a wide open door for fraud. And what happens when people try to do the right thing? Well, that's where it gets really ugly. This whole thing was protected by what you can only call a culture of impunity. Honest officials who tried to stop suspicious payments, they were forced to resign. Whistleblowers who dared to speak up, they were punished, their salaries were cut. And when the European investigators finally raided the OPKP offices, they were reportedly met with physical resistance. It paints a picture of a system that was rotten to its core. Now, with such damning evidence from European prosecutors, you'd think there would be swift legal action, right? Well, it's not quite that simple. This is where the story gets really political and where we start to hear accusations that the investigation itself is being blocked.
So here's the conflict. On one side, you've got EPPO, the European prosecutors. They're asking for a very focused investigation into the specific former ministers they've named in their report. But on the other side, the Greek government is proposing something very different, a much broader parliamentary inquiry into the agency's failures, one that would go all the way back to 1998. Critics are saying this is a classic political move to delay and deflect.
And this all begs a really important question. Why can't these European prosecutors just go ahead and file charges? If they have the evidence against these ministers, why do they even need the Greek parliament's permission to begin with? The answer comes down to this really unique feature in Greek law. It's called parliamentary immunity. And what it means, basically, is that only the national parliament itself has the power to investigate and prosecute government ministers, even former ones. And since the ruling party controls the parliament, that power ultimately rests with the suspect's own political allies. So you've got this political and legal standoff. But this isn't just some abstract debate happening in government buildings. There are very real consequences here for the country and for its people. So what is the ultimate price of this corruption? Well, for starters, there's the direct financial hit. The European Commission has slapped Greece with a massive fine for mismanaging all these funds, 415 million euros. And let's be clear, that's not a bill the government pays. That's a bill that lands squarely on the shoulders of Greek taxpayers.
But you know, the damage goes way beyond money. It's about trust. Just look at these numbers. A recent poll shows that nearly 3/4 of the Greek people believe that government ministers were directly involved in this scandal. That is a staggering, almost total collapse of faith in their own leadership.
And on top of everything else, the clock is ticking loudly. EPPO submitted its report back in June. By August, reports were already surfacing that the investigation into the ministers was being blocked. And now there's this huge deadline looming. In October, the statute of limitations for one of the key former ministers expires. Justice could literally just run out of time.
And the stakes here could not be higher. The European prosecutors themselves spell it out in their report. They warn that if there's no accountability, there's a very real risk that the same group of suspects could just continue what they were doing completely unhindered. And all of this leaves us with a fundamental and pretty troubling question. When a political system is asked to investigate itself, can there ever really be true justice? For millions of taxpayers in Greece and right across Europe, that question is still waiting for an answer.